Hello and welcome to the Untitled Anarchist Seagull channel, where we are going to continue searching for the keynote speaker for the Last JabroniCon. I am your host, an untitled anarchist seagull called Elise. Spent a day making dough-related things. I think we'll start out with some more IP Freely, the incoherent motherfucker we've been checking out for the past couple of weeks. Got one called Israel versus Palestine, What They Don't Want You to Know. And, I mean, there are two possibilities. I mean, really, there's not. It's going to be... The question is... Like, actually, he's so fucking incoherent. I'm not going to even dare a prognosis. We're just gonna jump right in. And it's gonna be fucked up. This is from a month ago. We'll see. I mean, first of all, the question is, who's they? Chat, anyone want an over-under on who the they is who don't want you to know something? It looks like it looks like he's starting out with some fairly awful footage of what was going on in Gaza a month ago, which is really just what's going on there now. But, yeah. Yeah, okay, and this motherfucker's what? He's going to bring his, like, incoherent ass comedy stylings to this. I'm just gonna content warning this whole segment right now. Because that's already fucked up. Like, this motherfucker should not touch anything like this with a 10-foot pole. Yeah, like, there's absolutely no reason.
I think we're in the brink of World War III. I'm very happy for the military-industrial complex. This is great for them. They deserve it. A lot of people are gonna die. Yeah.
Once again, it's one of these pointer-counterpoint things that isn't. Like, I mean, does he understand the format he's fucking working with?
What are your thoughts on the whole Israel versus Palestine thing?
I'm pro-war. Brace yourselves.
I'm just pro-war. That's what's most important to me. What about you? I'm anti-peace. Though different, I can empathize with your perspective.
Like, what the fuck is this? Like, who is he? Okay. Like, what the where is he going with this?
How do you think we got here? Where a month ago, none of us were emotionally enraged into supporting an all-out Israel versus Palestine war, and now all of a sudden we're all emotionally impassioned into believing this war must happen. Well,
okay. That's where we're going. I mean, because the question I've had, see, this guy's definitely going to be anti-Semitic, but the thing is, anti-Semitism, like, pro-Israel propaganda, Zionists never like to admit this, but anti-Semitism cuts both ways. In fact, the majority, and the overwhelming majority of, like, actually 100% of the socially acceptable anti-Semitism is pro-Israel. It is pro-Zionist. In fact, the majority of the Zionist movement, by far, is just white supremacist Christians. There aren't, because let me just throw a statistic in there. There are 14 million Jews on the planet. And all of us are not Zionists. In fact, the number of us who aren't Zionists, it has been growing for quite some time, and there's absolutely no reason to believe that's going to change anytime soon. Israel isn't doing a lot, isn't exactly enamoring itself to, well, anyone with a fucking conscience at the moment. So 14 million Jews, not all of us Zionists, and in just one Zionist organization, Kufi, Christians United for Israel, they have 80 million members. Okay, that's one Zionist organization, 80 million members. They've got like 3 members for every Jew on the planet. So, yeah, the Zionist movement is mostly fucking white supremacist Christian assholes like this guy, actually. Like this guy.
I think
So, I mean, the question has been, for me, where is he going to take the anti-Semitism he is almost certainly going to bring to this? And also, whether we're going to get a side of anti-Arab racism with that. I have a feeling we will. Hello, River Good to see you.
I think the reason why I'm so pro-war all of a sudden is because I've effectively been manipulated by weaponized morality via the media. Well, it started with Hamas's evil terrorist attack on innocent Israeli civilians on October 7th, because that's pure evil. I'm automatically on board with retribution against them at all costs. And now the retribution against them involves thousands of Palestinian civilians being killed in bombs.
Okay. Like, I absolutely did this. Okay. So far, like, shockingly not
bombings that are intended for Hamas, which I'm totally on board with because of what Hamas did on October 7th. Me too. Then there's all the kill the Jew people around the world dedicated to looking like evil idiots. They're totally on board with war because them being on the other side, they want all.
Wait, he's saying that pro-Palestinian rights people are on board with this fucking thing? That's why, yeah, I mean, why do you think it is that the fucking, every single one of these protests, any protest that has a kufiya, more than one kufiya in it, is going to be calling for a ceasefire, which is kind of the opposite. You see, kind of the opposite of having a war. It's where you don't shoot.
All the Jews eradicated.
And also, well, yeah, there we go. That's pro-Israel anti-Semitism right there. The idea that wanting Palestinians to just be treated like human beings, be treated decently, and have their land back and shit, somehow means having a problem with Jews. And that's bullshit. And it equates being Jewish with just being a fucking colonial racist, and that's bullshit too, and it's anti-Semitic bullshit. Pro-Israel anti-Semitic bullshit.
Probably don't know that they look like little crappy Hitler clones, do they?
Yeah, because, I mean, if there's one thing that Hitler loved to wear, it was kufiyas. I actually wrote a piece. I'm gonna link this in chat on this issue of I've written several actually on the issue of pro-Israel anti-Semitism, but this one is the one that I like to. There we go. It's semi tongue-in-cheek. It's called "Helpful Hints for Zionists: How to Advocate for Israel Without Being Anti-Semitic." And I've often thought about doing a video version of this. I wrote this, God, like 8 years ago, and it has, alas, never ceased to be relevant. And so this motherfucker is already. I will not comply, he says, as he's, like, promoting the official, like, mainstream propaganda on this subject.
Not too much self-awareness on their part. But in addition.
Yeah, like, they don't understand that when you call for a ceasefire, that means that you're pro-war.
To all the kill the Jew people wanting war, there's people who see them looking like detestable, evil idiots, and that makes them want war even more because
Wait, this motherfucker is gonna tone police. This motherfucker is gonna do tone policing. That's where this is going.
of how detestable all the kill the Jew people are. I'm now even more anti-peace. Same.
Like, what the fuck is the point of this? I mean, okay, yeah, you smeared supporters of Palestinian rights in a completely anti-Semitic way, but I mean, it's still framed in this really incoherent point counterpoint thing, except there's no fucking counterpoint. And also, this motherfucker looks like a live-action version of a Dr. Seuss character. I just noticed that, and I have to point it out so that you can't unsee it either.
And then there's all the devastating things that Israeli government has done to Palestinian people over the last handful of decades.
So, yeah, so you're going to acknowledge the horrible shit that the Zionist state has done to Palestinians, and then at the same time suggest that anyone who's against that stuff are, what did he call us? Detestable little Hitler people? Like, coherence, motherfucker. Have you heard of it?
Pretty terrible. So that unto itself causes more people to get on board with this war because they think what the Israeli government has done is pretty unjust.
Wait, but so, like, literally every position, what he's saying here is that every position, whether you want the war to happen and continue, or whether you want it to end, that's all pro-war? Like, make it make sense.
There's just no justice and peace. Then there's all the imbeciles on US college campuses openly supporting Hamas, saying that Israeli citizens deserved what Hamas did to them.
And evidence apparently is not going to be provided there. I like how, I mean, he, like, admits, okay, so he admits I should note, once again, I did not watch this before. I am seeing this for the first time now. I'm not playing up my reactions. This shit is just that level of does not compute. Because how the fuck are you going to acknowledge the devastating things Israel has done to Palestinians for decades? I mean, those are his fucking words. And then act as if there's, like, nobody who's against those things? Like, I mean, what the fuck?
And because there's such a vile group of people openly supporting evil terrorists, that makes it that much easier for people on the other side to slide down
if they're so openly supporting evil terrorists, though, dude, surely you should be able to show us a picture of that? Like, I mean, it would not be very hard at all, I suspect, to find, yeah, take a wide-angle picture and you'd find hundreds of placards bearing the word ceasefire, which is kind of, once again, I just have to note, it's sort of the opposite of what you do in a war, like, because what you do in a war usually involves the firing, and the ceasing of the firing is usually the not war, actually. So, I mean, Jesus Christ, this motherfucker. I don't know what he's saying. It is utterly unclear what he is saying. I have absolutely no idea. I mean, he does. He's like, I mean, he's the most Sam I am, motherfucker. Like, what is even his point? Because actually mostly he's like framing this in actually a very pro-Israel way, but then not doing that as well. Like, what the fuck is the point of this?
Slope of being super on board with this war without really thinking about it because they're so against what these pro-Hamas college campus idiots stand for. College is always money well spent. So at this point, no matter which side you're on, we all want war.
Well, except like the fucking millions and millions and millions and millions of us, like a super majority of U.S. citizens, an even bigger majority of people who vote for Democrats, an even bigger majority in the rest of the world who want a fucking ceasefire and wanted it yesterday. Like, I mean, what he's saying, I mean, because he's claiming that this means more and more people are on board with the war. That's like literally the opposite of truth. It does bear a relationship, an inverse relationship with the facts. Like, but where's he going with this?
It's the only answer. Yeah.
Does he have ChatGPT write this shit? Well, I mean, it's like he lies about the ceasefire people to the extent that he won't even acknowledge that that's what the demand has been. Instead, he claims that we're also all on board with this war, that we're all like fucking demanding an end to. But then the way he talks about Israel also, like, I mean, it's like if you had ChatGPT write a dialogue, right? Alex Jones talking with himself.
We all do want war all of a sudden, but how could you not when the media is feeding us all these things that make us passionately certain that war is super justified?
Except that lots of people don't.
Yeah, so what's important to not think about is how the media might be playing us to be super supportive for war.
That's what you're doing right now. I mean, by lying about the people who are against the war, you are literally the media playing us to be super for the war. That's literally what you're doing, motherfucker.
What do you mean? The media is just telling us what's going on. It just so happens that hearing what they tell us has swayed us all to want an incredibly deadly thing that none of us genuinely wanted.
Never ever buy Awaken CBD. Fuck that shit. That's apparently that brand throws this guy money. So yeah, I'd never heard of it. Never gonna buy that shit. Don't buy that shit ever. I would crop that out of this. Yeah, Awaken with ChatGPT.
Even a month ago. Yeah. Do you remember how all throughout COVID you saw the media as nothing but a propaganda arm influencing people to support masking lockdowns,
Like, he keeps on talking about this, making this sound like it's going to be point and counterpoint. Except that then they just agree with each other and it's all one fucking guy.
Jabs and the abolishing of constitutional rights? Dude, I didn't trust a thing they told me about what was going on. Right.
Well, then, so you must be wearing masks now because the media have spent like fucking a couple of years now telling people there's no need to take any precautions at all, telling you that the fucking pandemic is over, even though it's still the number 3 cause of death. I mean, yeah, it's clearly if you don't trust the media, you should really be taking some serious precautions. Yeah, he's gonna bring COVID into it. Why the fuck not, really? Why not? I mean, there's no narrative flow to be disturbed in this thing. It flows. It's narrative constipation.
And have you ever thought about why you're now trusting what the media is telling you about what's going on with Palestine and Israel?
Like,
no, I never have thought about that.
Like, okay, so the idea is that he's the smartest guy in the room, but he's also the only guy in the room. Is that the joke? Is that the joke you're making here, IP Freely? Fucking Dr. Seuss looking motherfucker. Is that the joke? He's the smartest guy in the room as long as nobody else is there.
And I don't think I will. Which is great. You're not supposed to. And do you think the media has changed since COVID? Well, I mean, I'm the one sort of believing them now and going along with how they want me to be pro-war. So they must.
Well, except that you've just stated that the only possible position on this issue is pro-war, even if you're against the fucking thing.
Must have changed and become a little more honest, right? Yeah, that's probably it. And the other thing not to consider is why all of us who are super pro-war all of a sudden are being played into supporting this war.
Except that you've just been showing. I wonder if it's something to do with the fact that the people who are against the war, the millions and millions, and actually like literally hundreds of millions of us, billions worldwide, are being smeared as objectionable little Hitler people, I believe he called us. I wonder if that's something to do with like promoting pro-war sentiment, like lying about the people who are against a war. I mean, and in fact, like, notice that he's avoided. It's like he's of course avoided just calling it a genocide, which is what it fucking is. Like of course, but like, what the fuck is this? God, I mean, it's funny that you bring up crimes against humanity in this context because back in 2020, the Brazilian Bar Association decided to do an analysis under international criminal law of Bolsonaro's U.S.-style "let it rip" policy. And they came to the conclusion that it constituted a crime against humanity. Just saying.
What shouldn't I consider about that? Well, just 2 weeks before the October 7th Hamas attack, Israeli President Netanyahu showed the UN Assembly a new map of the Middle East, and it had no Palestine on it.
No, it's not the first time he's done that. That's not a new thing. His party's fucking charter calls for a Zionist ethno-state from the river to the sea. It's right in there. And unlike Hamas, they have not changed their charter to get rid of anything, get rid of objectionable things like that. They have not actually amended it at all. Hamas did amend theirs in 2017, and they changed all the fucked up shit they'd written back in the 80s that operationally they had already abandoned years before, to make it clear that their struggle was not against Jews, but against Zionism in Palestine. Specifically to address the fact that even though they'd abandoned those provisions of their charter from the 1980s, they were still getting it thrown in their face all the time, so they changed it. Likud has not done that. Likud, they very explicitly says they want the whole of what they reckon Eretz Yisrael is, which is way bigger than that map, really. And they want it exclusively as a Zionist ethno-state. But, like, okay. So, he's going... What the fuck? Okay, we're going to bring it home to the extent possible. So, okay, he's brought up Netanyahu in the map. He could have also brought up the massive pogroms that October 7th was a response to.
And given the fact that the Israeli government originally funded Hamas, you have to wonder if their plan was to get Hamas to attack them in an evil, unforgivable way. Which...
now, if you were going to make an argument about how the media is playing you for a sucker, you might point out that actually at this point just about all of the claims of Palestinian atrocities from the 7th to 9th of October are falling apart completely. And now, actually, mainstream Israeli media are demanding an independent investigation to find out who actually killed who in the first place. Yeah, I mean, it was a fake down because it was like, yeah, you stay at home unless you're going to work. And then they had the thing where they were like, yeah, and now you have to wear masks in restaurants unless you're eating, which of course doesn't happen often in restaurants. And it's like, I mean, it was complete bullshit. And the fucked up and it was designed in a way to make it as unsustainable as possible. Is the thing. I mean, because people were not getting paid, people's jobs were, people were losing their jobs, people were losing their income. There was nothing to replace that in any sustainable way. They designed it to be disastrous, and then allowed it to just kind of just ended it without even following their own standards for when they would consider it to have been successful. And the fucked up thing about it is, if they'd done it properly, required masks from the start, and paid people to stay home from work until we actually got the thing under control, we could have gotten it under control. It wouldn't have taken anywhere near as long as it has.
Which then justifies a massive retaliation of force to literally wipe Palestine off the map. The media hasn't told me much about that, so you're probably just an anti-Semite.
Wait, but I wonder if maybe the people that you've been smearing all over this fucking video, the protesters who you say are pro-war in the sense that they're pro the ending of it, I wonder if they might be that might be what they're talking about. I wonder if maybe if you listen to those protesters, they might have something to say about all that.
Exactly. That's the new term meant to intimidate people from remembering their humanity and realizing they might be getting played by the globalists into supporting this war.
There we go. There we go. But, so, wait. This is like the laziest anti-Semitic conspiracy theory ever, actually. Because he's just kind of saying that literally all positions on the subject of Palestinian rights, whether you're against or whether you're for, something in between, that all of them are somehow the globalists. Fucking hell, this guy. Like, copy editing, motherfucker. Have you heard of it?
To say it. And then you can further consider how the U.S. is funding both sides of the war, giving
the U.S. is not funding both sides of the war.
$6 billion to give to Iran, to give to Hamas, and we're sending billions to Israel to aid in their military effort. Couldn't be about oil.
I mean, obviously it is, amongst other things, but it's also about the fact that the Palestinians demonstrated that they actually still are a force that has to be taken into account when the U.S. and Israel and the U.S. puppet states in the region had all decided that you could just sort of ignore the Palestinians and normalize relations with Israel quite openly, and nothing would happen. And so, yeah, I mean, actually, in Caleb Maupin's book about BreadTube as a CIA psyop, he actually claims, he actually says that globalism and imperialism are the same thing, and that when he says imperialism, he means the same thing that Nazis mean when they say globalism. Actually, China was not locked down like that. I mean, the thing, the necessities were actually brought to people.
I'm sure it's not. So when you consider these facts, you might start to believe that war was the goal all along, meant to accomplish a further goal that's not being honestly shared by certain governments.
Okay, what fucking goal is that, IP Freely?
And they're using the media to prey on people's morality that just wants evil abolished and justice for good in order to get them to be supportive for this war. So you're saying the reason why I might be so pro-war no matter what side I'm on?
Except that there's only one pro-war side, motherfucker. Like, Jesus. I had been actually procrastinating and shying away from doing this one because I figured it was going to be horrible. I did not foresee this.
Is because I've been played by the media to be obedient with her nefarious agenda? No, of course not. What I'm saying...
Wait, okay, so the guy who's played by the media to be obedient with a nefarious agenda, he's wearing the I will not comply beanie. Is that meant to be irony, or does this motherfucker just wear all of it? Is everything... I think it's just him putting his merch on and not even thinking about how it actually visually frames this fucking hot mess of video.
Is if you're a good person, you better forget your humanity and be all out supportive for this war. Okay, I am.
Even if that means calling for a ceasefire, which apparently is also a way of supporting a war.
Damn, I support it. Thank you for standing with the current thing. You're a good little sheep. Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay. Jesus, that was tiring. Now, I've got a number of options here. We've got Vush acting surprised that John Fetterman is the guy that he's always been and has never actually pretended not to be. We've got Richard Dawkins. This stuff showed up in my recommendations. Are we free to say no to the falsehoods of trans ideology? Well, you're in Britain. You probably get a fucking knighthood for it. We've got... Let's see. Feminism destroyed femininity. Woke culture with Pim Tool. Keffels is having a go. Yeah, I mean, he's 3 million subscribers. Not one of his videos has made any sense. Like, I don't even mean that, the narrative is substantively bullshit. I mean, the narrative isn't even coherent. Like, why is anyone watching this shit? I don't believe it's 3 million people hate watching him. Let's see. Any preferences, chat? Hate is now inclusive, breaking... That's more IP Freely. JP Sears, whatever the fuck. How to handle getting pulled over from PragerU, and then there's another PragerU short. Obama's anti-white film. Like, yeah. Right. Woke journalist furious after censorship backfires! Another Tim Pool thing. Calm Israel-Palestine debate quickly turns demonic on Vush. Which Vush one? There have been a couple. You mean Traitor? This one at the very bottom? That's about John Fetterman. He's gonna act all shocked that John Fetterman is exactly the guy that lots of people were pointing out from the very start. Like, literally the only reason that this motherfucker got any, liberals sort of flocked to him because, wow, he was wearing sweatpants and stuff. And it's like people have pointed out from the start. Actually, no, he's actually a reactionary, and he's extremely pro-Zionist and shit. And now people are acting all shocked about it, and Bush is gonna be shocked. It's like, okay, so that's an option. There's does woke count as a religion? Another Richard Dawkins one. Book talk. Peter Coffin interviews Caleb Maupin. So, what do you think? Kind of interested in the book talk one. I think we'll start with that one. We can always switch to another. We've got most of the next hour still. I am personally quite shocked, Adria, that you would be wanting to do a Caleb Maupin video. Yes, good takes incoming when Peter Coffin's in the house. Right, here we go.
Welcome, everybody. We have got Caleb Maupin here. The book.
Wow, at a CPI event, Caleb Maupin.
Is America going? Marxism, MAGA, and the coming revolution. We'd like to get into it. Caleb, how are you this morning?
I'm good. How about you?
I can't complain. If I did,
Yeah, if you did, you'd be kicked out of the CPI. You're not allowed to come.
it would take up time. We don't need that.
Sure.
Yeah, we really, especially because Peter Coffin's complaints generally pretty unedifying. John the Duncan did a hilarious thing, looking at Peter Coffin's shitball book about degrowth, which was basically just a Twitter thread, just totally unedited and then published in book form. I really highly recommend it. John the Duncan is good value in general. I enjoy listening to him, but the Peter Coffin book was hilarious.
So, where is America going? That's the opener. You gave us a very convenient title by phrasing it as a question.
Yeah, well, I kind of quibbled with what the title might be because I basically, the training that I got as
God, we're gonna get this wonderful insight into the author's mind. I always wonder where he gets his ideas. Like, does he pull them out of his ass, or does he dig in deeper?
a Marxist was that your job when giving an overall report is to explain what's happening, explain why it's happening, but then explain, more importantly, what to do about it. And I've noticed that...
And you're not particularly good at any of those things.
Many Marxist books have what they call the Chapter 5 problem, which is they explain what's going on, and they give a thorough analysis, and then it ends with, so maybe be a liberal activist, kind of, maybe? And then...
Well, I mean... Except this motherfucker, his whole proposal is just FDR.
The Chapter 5, where they tell you what you're supposed to do, is extremely weak. And they don't really have real answers. And so I set out to put out this book. Now, mainly this
Yeah,
book
to make them look less weak by comparison.
is a number of concepts that I've been talking about on my YouTube streams for the last several years. I talked about how capitalism is a crisis of overproduction, and we're leading toward, you know, a crisis rooted in the tendency of the falling rate of profit and technology and abundance under capitalism.
And Jesus, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. Didn't we meet in a John the Duncan chat at some point? Now that I remember.
Getting to poverty and all the classic Marxist analysis. I talked about Bonapartism. I talked about the real meaning of fascism and what it is, and the
Yeah, and Caleb thinks fascism is communism.
synthetic left. And I also then talked about the divisions in the ruling class and the potential openings for us to intervene.
On behalf of the ruling class. That's what's really. I mean, we were watching him last week. In the weird time world, in the weird time warp that is the stream. I guess it was yesterday. It was yesterstream. Where he was literally saying we need to fight on the side of the petty bourgeoisie against the haute bourgeoisie, and it's like, yeah, I mean, you're just doing a fascism there.
And those are all things that I felt there was a need for them to be written down. You know, if you watch all my streams,
What's
you know,
really
on YouTube,
amazing.
you'll get a sense
The
of
thing
them.
is, Caleb, let me just say there was no need for them to be written down.
Understandings, but it needed to be really written down, and it also needed to be defended with citations and sources. And there's
Does that mean this is going to be the book that includes citations and sources? Because his other books haven't. His other books will have a bibliography. Like, when you did your, like, first fucking essay in grade 4 or whatever, and you didn't have to actually cite your sources, you just had to make a list of books you read. That's what his books have. They don't have fucking citations.
quite a long bibliography in this text, a lot of quotes from a lot of different thinkers.
The problem of overproduction is one that anybody who was lucky enough to go to the CPI event recently in Washington, D.C. got a very good explanation on. Can you expound on that here and maybe tell people exactly where it goes in the book? Because I know it also leads us to the falling rate of profit and
Sure. Well,
Like, what's the point of this conversation? Like, this is basically just J.P. Freely, but with more of a narrative structure.
the understanding that Marxism has always had is that the problem with capitalism is that it's the only system in the world where greater wealth and greater abundance leads to greater poverty. In feudalism, in primitive hunter-gatherer civilization, all the systems that preceded capitalism, people were hungry because there were food shortages.
Now, in this context, it's worth remembering that Caleb Maupin called Thought Slime a Malthusian for acknowledging that there is overproduction.
It's only under capitalism you can have a situation where people become hungry, lose their jobs, there's layoffs, there's hunger because there's too much food.
donuts in the dumpster.
Yeah. People can become homeless, and we saw this in the 2008 financial crisis because there's too much housing.
No, he's quoting the Workers' World Party, which is interesting because they kicked him out. This is the Workers' World Party paper. Plenaries, including Fist Panel. Fist was the group he was in when he was in Cleveland. He saved this shit for that long.
I mean, that's what happened. People couldn't keep up with buying houses at the rate that houses were being produced. There was too much
He shits them out that quickly because there's no proofreading, there's no copy editing. He's just using like that thread unroll app, and then he self-publishes the shit.
housing. There's a huge amount of housing in America.
Shit, with the amount of writing that I do, like at this level, if we remove quality control and just Yeah, if I were to like write, if I were just to publish in book form, the volume of writing I do in a given year, you would fill bookshelves with it. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, that's not strictly wrong, but it's also not the only kind of overproduction that's going on. And it's actually somewhat confusing, as Kropotkin pointed out in Conquest of Bread, to call this sort of overproduction, where it's not too much production, where it is not necessarily objectively more than anyone has any use for, but subjectively more than the people who need it can afford. I mean, Kropotkin did a whole thing in Conquest of Bread where he says, you know, it's really actually a bit galling to hear this being referred to as overproduction when the reality is, if this stuff were available for free, he was talking specifically about agriculture, then you would have a massive shortage. The issue was not the issue was not one of overproduction, it was one of pricing, combined with actually underproduction. Whereas these days, the problem of overproduction we have is actually, I mean, there is overproduction in that sense, but there is, above all, overproduction in the sense that a whole bunch of shit is being made, more shit is being made than anyone has any need for. And, you know, and then you have things like planned obsolescences, where you're designing stuff to break sooner so that people will have to go out and buy more of it in order to, because otherwise you would saturate the market immediately. I mean, but he doesn't want to talk about that. When you talk about the fact that there's just more in numerous industries, more stuff being produced than needs to be produced, and mostly in the form of waste production, that's Malthusianism.
And people were losing their homes, and there's tent cities. And now here in Washington, D.C.,
There's still tent cities. People are still losing their homes. I mean, we still have way more empty housing than we have unhoused people. And that's not just the US, that's Ireland and Britain, I know for a fact. And probably, I would imagine, quite a few other places.
I mean, we see tents of homeless people everywhere, and there's housing everywhere. And it's not that it's just ironic that there's so much housing in America and so much homelessness. It's that homelessness is created by there being so much housing. Poverty is created by abundance, and that's the built-in problem of capitalism. However,
well, I mean, that's where it kind of breaks down, because that's the abundance is not necessarily of the same product. Like, the reason people are homeless is that the housing is too expensive. It's not, the reason they're homeless is that they're basically what they produce. Their role in production is no longer needed, or at the very least, nobody's willing to pay them enough to cover the housing. I mean, one common mistake, a common misconception is that people who are, you know, unhoused are also unemployed, when actually a lot of them have jobs, it's just not enough to pay the fucking rent. So it's not homelessness due to too much housing, it's homelessness due to too low wages and too high rent. I mean, there's been a situation that has been created where it is actually more profitable to wait. Yeah, he doesn't comprehend a damn thing. And in fact, I mean, and he gets it wrong. Like, because it's not this neat parallel. It's not like it's not literally, for the most part, that people are homeless because there's a glut of housing. It's because there's a glut of other things, including a glut of labor.
The technological revolution and the computer revolution has made that problem, that built-in problem of capitalism, that ever-present problem, so much bigger because of the fact that computers are eliminating labor like you wouldn't believe. I mean, ChatGPT, look what they can do.
Yeah, they can be incoherent. I mean, that's Caleb Maupin's aspiration, really.
So there's so much less of a role of the worker in production that the rate of profit that the capitalist makes goes down, right? Only human labor creates value.
Exactly. You get the.
I mean, all he's doing here is just buzzwords. He clearly just does not understand a word of this.
Explained it so eloquently at the event. Another thing that's present in this book that I think is very worth talking about is the counter gangs and the bread tube stuff. Like, you've been through.
Oh, so he's regurgitating that. Now, the thing about the counter gangs thing is he actually, in the bread tube book, he actually gets that history more or less correct. I mean, and that is a thing, that is a pattern in that book in general, that he will, like, describe historical phenomena that are fairly well done, like Kitson's use of counter gangs in the 30 Years' War in Ireland, and various other things like that. And then he will just sort of say those things. You know, this happened in the 60s and 70s in Ireland. And therefore, without any examples, without any argumentation, we can just assume that these people I don't like are a CIA psyop. Of course he is. I mean, apparently he got 2 of them back.
Through that, obviously, the bread tube serves imperialism. But I'm sure you went into much more detail in this book.
I don't know if it's this angle or what, but fucking Peter Coffin's whiskers look like those of an 1890s prospector in California from this angle.
Where did you take that?
Well,
in this book?
I didn't want to spend too much.
You won't believe the bullshit I made up this time. Like, I mean, that would be an interesting one for him to actually use citations. I'd love to just compare, if I could find a way to get my hands on it without paying him money somehow, to see if he just copied and pasted that bullshit from the last book in there, because I would not put it past him.
Much time on the bread tubes.
Fucking hell, the chapter title here. Counter gains. It's counter gangs.
Stuff, because I wrote a whole book about it. I mean, I mentioned it in passing because
Sure.
it's important, but the main thing to talk about is that over the course of the 1970s, after the U.S. was defeated in Vietnam, the way the United States was able to kind of turn things around and ultimately win the Cold War.
Yeah, you remember all those great 1970s bread tubers? I mean, YouTube was so big in the 1970s. Everybody was on the YouTubes in the 1970s.
Was by kind of reinventing their strategy. And when the Cold War started out, it was capitalism versus communism. The great democratic Christian, capitalist West versus the evil Marxist-Leninist communists. And things happened like the Vietnam War, like the Korean War, like McCarthyism, and the USA was isolating itself, and communists around the world were the champions of national liberation struggles, etc. And so communists actually were quite successful. But
what the fuck does this have to do with bread tube? Like, what does this? This is what he does. This is what he did in the fucking bread tube book too. He'll be like, yeah, so here's some some things that fairly uncontroversially happened in the 1950s and 1960s. Oh, by the way, Thought Slime is CIA. Not going to give you a citation for that. Not going to give you an example of that. Just going to say it because you're already nodding along because you sort of half remember the things I'm talking about.
But in the 1970s, Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger were kind of given the task of developing a new strategy. And part of that strategy was muddying the waters, playing the Soviet Union against China, manipulating socialists against...
Now, this is weird because usually when he talks about counter gangs, where he goes is like the Congress for Cultural Freedom, where the U.S. tried to drive a wedge between the Soviet Union and Jackson Pollock by funding an organization he was involved with.
against each other. We saw the rise of Euro-communism
Everything about him is sleazy.
in Western Europe, where the various communist parties were kind of bribed and nudged into terminating their relationship with the Soviet Union. And there was an effort to manipulate left-wing politics that was very successive. And by the time
It's so weird. Usually, now this is something that happened in the 1970s, but I just can't help coming back to the fact that the bread tube wasn't the 1970s. You're like, that's nearly half a century difference. This is like trying to explain the new left in the 1970s by talking about shit that happened in 1920.
Time the Soviet Union ultimately fell, the global communist movement was in such confusion and chaos that, you had situations like the Kampuchea War of 1978 where communists were killing communists. I think there was a Vietnam vet who said, it was crazy. They sent me to Vietnam telling me my job was to fight.
Yeah, except, you might point out in this context that the U.S. was very much on the side of Pol Pot at that time. In fact, they part of the justification for the devastating economic warfare that prevented Vietnam recovering from nearly 20 years of US aggression was that they had intervened to get rid of Pol Pot and stop various cross-border attacks from Cambodia.
Communists. But now in Vietnam, we have the United States backing the Cambodian communists to kill the Vietnamese communists, who are then being invaded by the Chinese communists, all on the grounds that they're being backed by the Soviet communists. And it was about that manipulation and confusion of left-wing politics. That's how the USA was ultimately able to bring down the Soviet Union, disorienting the left-wing movements. And that term counter-gang, let me just tell you real quick where that comes from.
Are we going to see? Are we gonna? Is he gonna give any actual examples?
Mm-hmm. That comes from Kenya, and that was the Land and Freedom Army, the Mau Mau. They had a huge uprising against the British in the 1950s that was defeated. The way it was defeated was British intelligence and military strategist Frank Kitson developed what he called counter gangs, which were.
Yeah, he actually really brought this method into its own in Ireland in the 60s and 70s through the 1990s, and actually really even today.
Groups of people who acted like Mau Mau liberation fighters, but were actually working or being covertly supported by the British. They would commit atrocities that were blamed on the Mau Mau. They would sometimes claim the Mau Mau were selling out and they were the real anti-colonial heroes, and by sending these groups of people that looked like...
Incidentally, the most emblematic example of a counter gang, according to Kitson himself, was something called the Military Reaction Force, which was just a hit squad of the British Army. They did not claim to be anything else, but they would just sort of show up, and the idea was that they would just act, they were just a death squad. They just sort of go in, somewhat undercover, but not pretending to be any kind of specific organization or anything, and just fucking shoot people.
Like anti-colonial revolutionaries out to muddy the waters and confuse things. They were able to diffuse the struggle, and ultimately, we know what happened, and the Kenyan Liberation Army and Liberation Movement was defeated. The British colonialists were successful.
I brought that up after the crisis of overproduction, because ultimately that, I think, is...
because we were kind of losing the audience there a little bit. They've heard this a few times. Some of them even know the theory better than you do. So I was thinking you could move over to some red meat and you could find a way to slag off Thought Slime. But you're not. You're kind of not doing that. You seem to be taking your time on there. So maybe you might want to move it along.
It's so important to understand why we're not talking about things like the tendency of the rate of profit to fall,
you just were talking about those things,
of overproduction, etc. But there's an interesting aspect to it in that you also touch on in chapter 2, which is about fascist ideology.
Oh God, this motherfucker talking about fascist ideology,
and how there really isn't a fascist ideology or aesthetic.
Okay, so we've gone from previously he had argued very conveniently that there was no such thing as a cult. The term cult was meaningless, which is why he didn't have a cult, because the term cult was meaningless. Very convenient there. So now he's arguing that the term fascist has no ideological meaning. I mean, it's one thing to say, and I think it's actually correct to say, that fascism is a syncretistic and opportunistic ideology, and it does shift with the terrain it's operating in important ways, while maintaining certain commonalities, namely that it is an authoritarian movement in defense of a ruling class that feels threatened. I mean, it's one thing to say that, but to say that it has no ideology, it obviously has an ideology. It obviously is quite coherent in certain ways, because it is quite identifiable. And in fact, that's why everybody identifies Caleb as one.
And the counter gangs and all those revolutionaries are just constantly focusing on the idea that there is a fascist ideology or aesthetic, and that seems to primarily be what they're talking about. And obviously you can kind of warp that to be whatever you want it to be. It's ideology, it's aesthetic. You can say anyone's a fascist if you really want to. And
well, I mean, unless of course you accept that there is such a thing as a fascist ideology and a fascist aesthetic, in which case you can't really say anyone is a fascist, because they would have to meet the definition ideologically and aesthetically. If you wanted to be able to call anyone a fascist, really what you'd want to do there, what you'd be going for, is to just claim that there is no there there.
They do. How ultimately can we?
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's what I was saying. They look like a fucking 19th century California gold rush prospector. Concern it, these bread tube varmints.
Back to talking about these important aspects of like the fundamental contradictions of capitalism that permeate themselves up to now the sort of extra super imperial stage that we're in today.
Well,
the extra super imperial stage. Wow, we're getting deep here.
Book, I point out that fascism is economic in its nature.
Yeah.
And that R. Palm Dutt, who I think is one of probably the most important writer.
Gang.
Yeah.
I'm 100% there with you on Dutt.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm really shocked that somebody in Caleb Muppett's cult would be 100% with him on Dutt.
R. Palm Dutt, in his book Fascism and Social Revolution, which was written at the height of 1930s fascism, 1934, he made clear that this is an economic system. This is an attempt to save capitalism. And the ideology and the aesthetic, all that's made up as they go along. Fascism is what they do. It's not what they say.
Well, except that if the objective of fascism is preserving the capitalist system, then obviously, at least to the extent of doing that, that is going to be determinative of the ideology of the thing. Like, that's why, for example, a fascist is probably going to be obsessed with small business and central state planning, and very uninterested in talking about, say, workers' control.
And that what it is that when capitalism enters a long-term economic crisis, the capitalists have to figure out a way to save their system. And the only way they can save their system is with mass destruction, driving down living standards, reducing consumption. And what the Nazis did is they created a layer of the population that were slave laborers in concentration camps. They restarted military spending.
I wonder, the last time he went down this path, he actually managed to claim that the massive growth in production, the massive productive machinery that the Nazis set up through the concentration camps and by other means of disciplining workers in order to keep productivity up, including the total war period and all that shit, that was degrowth. I mean, is that where he's gonna go with this bullshit?
They crushed the labor movement and were able to kind of rejuvenate the economy of Nazi Germany for a few years. And it was a mechanism to try and stabilize capitalism. And ultimately, it wasn't a long-term solution, and it led to the Second World War.
I mean, the again, just returning to like the very root of the problem, the beginning of the book, that is not possible to change. It's just something that, you know, you get to a point where, you know, production is way past consumption, and you're going to have to figure out a way to maintain the class supremacy of the bourgeoisie in some way.
And Caleb's way of doing that is by openly allying himself with one part of the bourgeoisie rather than another.
So ultimately, that kind of leads us into the coming.
Where he just sort of, it's God. Okay, so it's just jumping from one topic to this sort of leads us. That's their segue. That's their fucking segue. Well, I guess this sort of leads us into some other totally unrelated thing that does not follow from anything that I'm saying. But we're trying to get through a bunch of this shit, and just look at how little of the book has been we've been through so far.
Triumph of illiberalism, and I'm just going to tee you up for this because I think that is just where we have to be prepared for it, so we have to know what's coming.
Well, when we talk about liberalism and illiberalism, this is a big...
I mean, let's just remember, illiberalism is just Orban Viktor's term for his brand of fascism. And a whole lot of pro-fascist assholes immediately adopted that. And a bunch of liberals who wanted to avoid talking about fascism, who wanted to just sort of muddy the water, and they decided to make it about illiberalism.
Conversation that a lot of academics have, right? Liberalism is the Western view that celebrates the rights of the individual above all else, right? It says the individual is great and that any form of collectivism is some kind of threat. And the ultimate expression of liberalism is philosophical irrationalism, and that's largely the teachings of Friedrich Nietzsche, and you know his you know.
And now I see where Peter Coffin's mustache came from.
His work about, you know, the Übermenschen, the great individual who's suppressed by society, and, you know, the work I draw from Lukács, who talks about how that was the basis of Nazism, really, that Nazism drew from Nietzschean supremacism and contempt for the masses of people.
Absolutely.
But
through Heidegger.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that in the West, that liberalism, that ultra-liberalism, that philosophical irrational...
Are we just gonna zoom out from all these fucking pictures? Because that's...
has become almost the ruling ideology.
Agreed.
The main American or purveyor of it in American society was Ayn Rand. And Ayn Rand is a huge influence on U.S. culture, not simply among conservatives. Stacey Abrams, who's a liberal, she says Atlas Shrugged is the book that changed her life. She bases herself on that. And this is the belief that one should not have compassion, one should not have empathy, one should not...
Okay, so where the fuck are we going with this?
Have any loyalty to a country, a cause, a religion, or anything like that. One should simply be motivated by their own self-interest, and that anyone who tries to get you to be part of a larger group or something is trying to con you and scheme you. And that...
Oh, well, I mean, not that there aren't examples of people trying to get you into a, larger group who are trying to con you and scheme you. For example, there's Caleb Maupin right here. He is definitely trying to con you and scheme you.
That worldview used to be the worldview of the ultra-rich. They've always felt that way.
It still is the worldview of the ultra-rich. I mean, do the Koch brothers not count?
They've always been self-interested and callous and cold and calculating. That's how they got to the top of the pyramid in capitalism.
Of course.
But they've been foolish enough to spread their ideology all throughout U.S. society, and now the country is literally coming apart. And the elites don't even have any loyalty to each other. They're not all on the same team at this point.
Yeah. I love how this is a thing he did in the fucking Bread Chew book, too. This idea that it's somehow indicative of a crisis when there are divisions in the ruling class, which is just another indication that he just has never actually bothered to read any of the shit that he quotes, and what he does quote, what he has read, he doesn't comprehend, because there are always divisions in the ruling class. Capitalists are in constant competition with one another. within industries, between industries. The whole point of the state in capitalism is to smooth over those differences and try to sort of postpone class conflict um between the ruling class as a whole and the working class. Like, this isn't some new, like, that isn't something that isn't a crisis. That's how capitalism fucking works. There's competition involved. Like, he Jesus.
Point. They've all got competing economic interests, and they're fighting with each other because they have no real loyalty. Plus, the population doesn't feel any particular loyalty.
I mean, and notice that this is all, he blames this on Ayn Rand ideology. So, I mean, which is just straight up, I mean, that is just the most idealist possible explanation. Not that capitalism, with its inherent drive to compete, with its, the whole competitive nature of the thing, the individualistic nature of it, all of these things create conditions where that sort of ideology is going to be common amongst the people who are in the ruling class and need to, for one thing, justify their class position, and for another thing, justify it to themselves, and also justify it to the people that they depend on in order to stay in that class, the working class. No, it's just like Ayn Rand ideology spread like a cancer. And of course, once again, as as always, when Caleb Maupin points a finger, there's a Jew on the other end of it.
To anything, and society overall is coming apart. And this is the expression of political liberalism. Now, it's rooted in the capitalist system and the rule of profits, but it's taken to its logical conclusion. And ultimately, some kind of illiberalism will emerge. Now,
wait, it's rooted in capitalism, the rule of profits, but it's taken to its logical conclusion? What the fuck does that mean? I mean, you could just say that this is capitalism taken to its logical conclusion, but then, then you wouldn't be able to make the move that he's actually trying to set up here, where he explains how actually what you need to do is ally yourself with the most reactionary segments of the ruling class in this division.
Now, my hope is that it's a socialist.
The synthetic left might think that when the ruling class are fighting amongst each other, you kind of hope that they fight to the death and all win, and exploit that in order to beat them. No. That would, I mean, that's just that is probably CIA funded Trotskyism or something. No, what you gotta do is you find the most reactionary, anti-worker, fascist motherfuckers in the ruling class, and you crawl up their asses, and you set up a little duplex in there.
Illiberalism.
Mine as well.
Yeah, and there was then an ad recently that a lot of academics signed where they called out cancel culture, and they.
Oh yeah, a lot of academics. This was the ad, the open letter where a bunch of reactionaries signed it and said, trans people, we're getting criticized for advocating the oppression of trans people, and we feel like we shouldn't be criticized for it because free speech is when you don't get criticized.
There was then an ad recently that a lot of academics signed where they called out cancel culture, and they referred to it as illiberal because there is an element of illiberalism in cancel culture, silencing free speech, taking action.
I mean, signed by, among other things, Hussein Ubish, he's a cunt. Saeed Jalani, fuck him. Let's see, what was it? I mean, it was just all sorts of dodgy people. Oh, Cornel West. Somehow I did not notice that Cornel West, Michael Walzer signed it. The guy who explained how just war theory means that Israel gets to murder 20,000 people in Lebanon in 1982. Randy Weingarten, that doesn't surprise me, absolutely. I mean, there are a bunch of people who really should have gotten way more shit over this. Like, I don't remember hearing that fucking Cornel West signed this thing. Barry Weiss, I mean, that doesn't surprise me. Gary Kasparov, oh yeah, I mean, he's full of shit most of the time, too. Wow, yeah, I mean, all sorts of shitty people. I don't think Chomsky's, I don't know, maybe, I don't know if he did. Is this, hang on. We're going to back up a little bit.
Against liberal because
Berman, Blight, Blair. Okay, it's
there is an element of
alphabetical.
illiberal.
Oh yeah, he did on fucking hell. Oh, Jeffrey Eugenides wrote that like, really shitty exploitative book about intersex people.
In cancel culture, silencing free speech.
Oh, and Jesse Singal, of course. Yeah, lots of shit. Like lots
Taking
of
action against people for the way they speak, imposing certain social rules on people, and that the ruling class is at the same time they're pushing this very extreme liberalism. They're also experimenting with little illiberal movements that might be necessary.
I mean, that name sounded fake as fuck, actually.
And it's this weird contradiction. And that one thing that's always pointed out is that liberalism is always propped up by illiberalism.
Absolutely.
Except that illiberalism is a bullshit term that was invented in like the last decade. Illiberalism as a term describing a cohesive set, cohesive ideology is an extremely recent thing, and it is a term used by fascists.
All these people who say they believe in free speech and freedom of assembly and all of that, and all these people who don't believe in repression, they're living in a society that's propped up by the U.S. military, a highly collectivist, illiberal organization. They've got police, that are, the way the FBI is trained. You look at it, all this belief that everyone should just think for themselves. There is no cause. They need illiberal institutions to prop up their privilege.
Like at this point, the term illiberalism means nothing. Like, so the idea here is that liberalism is everything but the institutions of liberalism?
Of being ultra-liberal and individualistic.
The whole idea of spreading democracy feeds right back into that. We're not spreading democracy as, well, our state isn't. We are, hopefully.
I know you fucking aren't.
But we're spreading what the American state wants. That's really all it is. Democracy to the U.S. state is doing what the U.S. state says. That's a liberal. Yeah, that's
like they just have no coherent understanding of any ideological concept. It's tiring. I'm surprised that they haven't got J.P. Freely up on there.
That's heading down that path,
right? And that liberalism is I guess I'll use your word, an Ouroboros, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's just you can't.
Ouroboros, you fucking dickhead.
Can't really have liberalism at the end of the day because human beings are collective creatures in nature. Everything human beings have ever achieved, they've done in a group, from the time of hunter-gatherer civilization right up to today. If you look at the New York City skyline, every single building there is the collective result of thousands and thousands of people.
Jesus. Okay, well, we are nearing 1 o'clock. It is time to give it a rest for tonight. And not a moment too soon, because I was finding that very tiring just now. I think we might try the Dawkins tomorrow. Thank you to everyone who's joined. Nice to see you. Hope you have a good weekend. Hope to see you tomorrow at 11:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time, where we will continue the Last JabroniCon. And I already link this. The piece I wrote. I don't know if if everyone was actually there when I linked it. It's a piece I wrote on pro-Israel anti-Semitism. It's sort of tongue-in-cheek, called "Helpful Hints for Zionists: How to Advocate for Israel Without Being Anti-Semitic," which is response to, like, there are these liberal Zionists, like, write lots of these articles where it's like how to criticize Israel without being anti-Semitic, and it's like, here, all you have to do is not talk about how fucked up the regime is, and maybe downplay it a little bit, and don't mention how racist it all is, and maybe don't talk about the right for return and stuff like that. And and the things get thrown around, and meanwhile, like, the anti-Semitism on the pro-Israel side never gets talked about, and there is so much more of it. It is the dominant, the only socially acceptable anti-Semitism, and the dominant form of anti-Semitism more generally. And so I decided to write a piece, pointing in the style of one of these how to criticize Israel without being anti-Semitic bullshit articles, to just talk about that a little bit. I wrote it in that, like, 2015, and it has unfortunately never ceased to be relevant. So, and if you are enjoying the stream, please consider supporting the stream. I always appreciate tips and Patreon subs and things like that. And other than that, let me just wish you